Welcome. This is a lecture series. Please have paper and pencils ready to take notes. It is very important that you take detailed notes. You can use these notes during assignments and perhaps during assessments later on. Let's get started. Please be ready to pause the video when I instruct you to do so. Today we're going to discuss Standard 8.3.R.3 for the state of Oklahoma, 8th grade standard, 3rd standard, reading, point 3. This is the language of the standard. Please pause the video and write down the definition of the standard. Students will analyze how authors use key literary elements to contribute to the meaning of a text. We will be looking at setting, plot, characters, for example, a protagonist and an antagonist, characterization, theme, and conflict, for example, internal and external. Please pause the video now. Let's first look at the types of characters you may come across in fiction. There are round characters, dynamic characters, flat characters, and static characters. The definition of each is here on this page. Characters are either protagonist, antagonist, or supporting. And the author is going to reveal a character to us through either indirect characterization or direct characterization. So let's break this down just a little bit. You can pause the video in a second and you can write down the definitions that you see on this page. Let's talk about round characters. Round characters are true to life. Somebody that makes you feel as if they are a real person. A dynamic character is somebody who changes and they learn something during the story. A flat character has very little personality. You don't usually get involved in that character. A static character stays the same throughout the entire story. They do not change. They don't usually learn anything. They just are the same person from the beginning as they are at the end. Now let's talk a little bit about the types of characters you see here: protagonist, antagonist, and supporting. Your lead character is your protagonist. The antagonist is usually somebody who antagonizes or opposes the lead character. The supporting characters are usually all the other characters in the novel that support the lead character, the protagonist, or support the antagonist. Let's briefly discuss indirect characterization. We will discuss this in more detail in a coming up slide, and direct characterization as well. You can pause the video and write down these simple definitions. Indirect characterization. We learn about a character from the author whenever they have another character tell us something about them. Perhaps their physical characteristics, or we can hear the character's thoughts and words, so we learn something about them as well. This is indirect characterization. Direct characterization is when the author gives us direct statements that help us to understand the character. Make sure you've paused the video to write down the definitions on this page. Now let's talk about plot. Plot is very important. The plot is the literary element that gives us the structure of the story. It shows us how the story is arranged with these events and the actions that happen within the story. Notice that it's like a triangle or a pyramid. You start off at the bottom with the exposition, the start of the story. Then you have rising action. These are things that happen in the story, like conflicts and crises. And then you have the climax. This is whenever it's the turning point, the most intense moment, that moment you're sitting on the edge of your seat. And then you have the falling action. Perhaps this is a resolution to the climax or the problems that have happened. Then we have the final resolution, the tying together of all of these threads to make a full story. So there has to be some type of conflict in the plot. It will either be a person against another person, a person, say, against nature, like a blizzard, or a tsunami. A person against society. We mean by society such as governments, laws, or the general thinking of people overall. Then we may have a type of conflict that's person versus self. This would be where a person is trying to perhaps overcome a bad habit or overcome some type of thinking or perhaps the way they've been raised. Then you also have the person versus supernatural. This would be something that does not occur naturally in our world. This could be, say, for instance, Superman, or it could be a superhero against another superhero. So please pause the video and write down the fiction plot elements that you see here on this screen. Now let's discuss setting. Setting is where the story is taking place. Setting could include a lot of different elements. There are 4 bullet points here of what the setting could include. But why do we have settings? Settings tell us something not just about the character, not just about the location, but it helps us to set up the atmosphere, and it helps us to understand perhaps some adversities or some benefits that the character is experiencing. Please pause the video and write down the definitions here for setting for a fiction story. Now let's discuss theme. As I've discussed in previous videos, the theme is a central idea or the central message in the story. Think about what you would tell somebody who asks you after you've watched a movie in 1 or 2 sentences what that movie was about. Maybe the insight that you have learned. Many fiction stories want us to learn about the human condition. They want us to come away a better person for having read the story. Sometimes that theme is stated directly. Sometimes it's just implied by the events or the actions that happen within the story. Please pause the video and write down the definition of theme. Let's go back to characterization. What is direct characterization? It's how the author tells his or her story about the reader, about the character. They're directly, specifically revealing traits in a very direct, straightforward way. And it's very important to show why the character is motivated to do the things that they're doing. Direct characterization is the shortest way for us to understand what that character is about and what they are undergoing. Please pause the video and write down the definition of direct characterization. Now let's consider indirect characterization. There are 5 different methods of indirect characterization: speech, thoughts, effect on others toward the character, actions, and looks. Please pause the video and write down these 5 things. If the definitions or further explanations help you, please write those down as well. Now let's talk about external versus internal. External conflict takes place outside of the body. Notice in the cartoon that the little girl is saying something to the little boy, or vice versa. This is outside of the person's body. Internal takes place inside of the body or the mind. Internal, there's only one: man or woman versus self, person versus self. This is when this character is struggling with their own ideas, thoughts, morals, perhaps experiences, things that happen to them that leads them to be who they are. So internal conflict is man or woman versus self. Please pause the video and write down internal conflict, man or woman versus self. There are several different types of external conflict. As we discussed earlier, there's man versus nature. For instance, if you're reading a book about somebody who is in nature, in the wilderness, and perhaps stuck out in a blizzard. This would be man versus nature. Man versus man. This might be the example of a book where you have The Lord of the Flies, where you have children that are against one another. That is also man against nature. It even has elements of man versus society. Some books have more than one type of conflict. It depends on what the writer is really choosing to focus on. You also have man versus society, perhaps where man is considering the thoughts of a local government. They're trying to take change, or the local society norms. Perhaps if you lived in puritanical England, what was expected of you may not be what you necessarily believed for yourself. So that would be man versus society. Man versus machine. This could be seen in many types of science fiction. For instance, the Terminator movies or the Terminator books. That is man versus machine. You also have man versus fate. This is usually found in Greek tragedies. Please pause the video and write down these types of external conflicts you may come across in your works of literature. On the next few slides, I have broken down each one of these external conflicts with the definition. I will show them to you. You may pause the video and write down the definitions individually if you so wish to do so. The first one is man versus man. Man versus nature. Man versus society. Man versus machine. Man versus fate. Let's look at the standard again. So in this standard, students are going to analyze how an author uses the key literary elements to contribute to the meaning of the text. Now that you know what each one of these mean, why would the author use them? How did they use these elements to contribute to the meaning of the text? For instance, if you were going to read a book that had a setting such as Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, does the setting lend anything to the meaning of the text? Of course it does. It's very important to the text. So how those key literary elements are used is very important, and how it affects the meaning of the text is very important. That is how this standard applies to your reading and writing. Thank you for joining me today. Please practice these skills with assignments and then take an assessment to ensure mastery of the skill. Keep your notes handy.